Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. So in this video I'm going to paint a master study of one of my favourite artists, and his name is Edgar Payne. He was a historical painter born in the 1800s, and he's famous for painting lots of scenes of the American Southwest, also mountains and all sorts of things, and his paintings are really unique. He's got these really large gestural brush marks, and his use of colour and values is just absolutely some of the best out there, and just a really inspiring landscape artist. Also had a real eye for composition, and I've learned a lot from him. So in this video I thought I would recreate one of his paintings from a book called Edgar Payne, The Scenic Journey, which is a book of lots of his artworks, and I love to look at this book in order to just get inspired. So I think he's a great artist. Also, another thing I'd like to say is, if you're learning to paint, especially painting things like landscapes, there's absolutely no shame in copying someone else's artwork in order that you can learn some painting techniques. And I did this myself when I'd had a long break from painting, and then 13 years ago I got back into it and got back into painting seascapes at the time, and I actually copied a couple of painting demonstrations in a book. So as I say, no shame in it at all. I think it's a really great way of improving your painting skills or learning to paint as well. And I actually learned quite a bit just from recreating Edgar Payne's artwork. So the painting I'm featuring in this video, it's from an old painting of his called Arizona Clouds. The original painting's a lot bigger than the one I've created, but we'll get into it. I'll show you the video. Just before I start, I'd like to quickly tell you about my Patreon channel. Each month I upload a full-length painting tutorial video plus bonus content and photos and other cool stuff, all for just $5 a month. I'll put the link in the description box below. So that's enough of me rabbiting. Without further ado, we'll just get straight into the video, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm painting on a 10" by 12" linen panel. And I'm painting with oil paints, sketching out the composition here using burnt sienna mixed with liquid original. The liquid original is just to speed up the drying time, and it also improves the flow of the paint. This linen panel is made by a company called Seascape at canvaspanels.com, and I've put a link in the description box below. Now, the original painting here was about 28 inches by 34 inches, which is quite big. And obviously I've made it a much smaller painting, just a 10 by 12, and also I've squished down the sky a little bit, so it's not completely accurate compared with the original, but definitely close enough. Now, as I said, I'm using oil paints, and the brand of paint I'm using is Blue Ridge Oils, and I'm using my standard palette, which is titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and phthalo green. So I was able to paint this quite easily with these colours. Now I start off by painting the cloud shadows, because I always paint my dark values first, and value is how light or dark a subject is. I find it easiest to paint the dark values first, because I then find it much easier to paint the areas in light afterwards. So this cloud mix I'm using is a mix of ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna, which helps to desaturate the blue, titanium white and a dash of alizarin crimson, and I'm using a number 5 flat brush. The cool thing about this painting is it really lends itself to using large flat brushes, because I can create those loose gestural brush marks, which is what made Edgar Payne's paintings so recognisable and identifiable as his work. The thing I love about Edgar Payne is his use of colour, and you can clearly see the colours he's using through his brush marks. So just studying his paintings is a way that you can learn more about colour. The book I'm actually painting from, where I got this image from, is Edgar Payne's The Scenic Journey, if you ever want to check that out. And although I'm painting on a white background here, I'm pretty sure, looking at the painting, that he might have toned his canvas before starting the painting. But in this case I felt it was easier to just carry on painting on a white surface. Now after I'd painted the darkest shadows within the clouds, I then painted some of those half tones within the clouds. The sort of transition areas between the darkest shadows and the areas of the clouds that are in the full sunlight. And this is the same colour mix, but just with a lot more titanium white. And I also vary some of those mixtures anyway, so maybe I'll add a little bit more ultramarine blue just to give it that blue-grey kind of tone, or for certainly some of those half tones I'll add a little bit more burnt sienna. I try not to add too much burnt sienna because I don't want the clouds to look muddy. Now following this I was then painting some of these dark shadows in the distance. These would be cloud shadows over these rocks here. So these are the same colours I would have used in the clouds, but with barely any titanium white. So the value here is really dark. Same for this shadow here in the foreground. Again, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, a little alizarin crimson and just a little bit of titanium white. I've even added some more burnt sienna in places as well, as I can see this in the painting. I was also painting around the outline of the horses. I left the horses until last pretty much. One thing I've noticed about the reproduction of the original painting in this book that I'm referring to is there didn't seem to be much difference between the values of these shadows. So for example, this shadow that's in the foreground compared with the shadows in those distant landforms. I'm not really sure what to call them. I don't know if they're canyons or whether they'd be considered mountains. I've never had the chance to go to Arizona, so I hope to one day be able to visit a location like this and paint it from life. It looks absolutely stunning. And now I'm also painting in some of these shadows in these rock formations here, and again it's the same colour combination, but I've added a tiny bit more titanium white just to make the value a little bit lighter, and I've used a little bit more alizarin crimson in the mix, as I noticed there's more of a crimson cast in this shadow compared with the other shadows which are more blue. And then when filling in the rest of these shadows on this landform here, I noticed in the painting it seemed to have a bit more of a red cast to it, so I've used more burnt sienna in the mix here. But again, it's still the same colour combination that I've used in all the other shadows. And then I was able to use that same mix for some of these red areas in the shadows here in the foreground. Now there was also a distant hill or landform here, and of course the value is going to be much lighter than the shadows that are in the foreground and midground. And I've pretty much used the same colours and almost the same values that I've used in some of these cloud shadows. Now for the very foreground, I've marked in some shadows on these grasses. I'm not sure if they're grasses or sedges, or not really sure what they are actually, but the plants are in the foreground, and that's a mix of ultramarine blue with just a dash of yellow ochre. So I've now got in all my shadows in the painting. That's sort of making the bones of the whole thing, and I'm going to start painting in the areas in light, starting with the furthest zone away, and that's the sky and clouds. So I'm painting these cloud highlights here using a mix of titanium white, a little bit of burnt sienna, and I used just a dash of cadmium yellow because looking at the painting here, it looks like it has a kind of very pale yellow in it, but more kind of pure than a yellow ochre. So normally I'd use yellow ochre in my clouds, but I actually found that a dash of cadmium yellow really looks pretty good. So this is something I might add to my own clouds in my future paintings of the landscape paintings that I do from my own reference. Now again, I'm using a number 5 flat brush, and the brand of brushes I'm using are Rosemary & Co. I've been using their brushes for years. I find they're really long lasting and they're just really nice to paint with. So if you want to get some Rosemary & Co brushes, I'll put a link in the description box below. Same also for the Blue Ridge oil paints. Now I have to say I'm really enjoying painting the sky and clouds here, and just having that opportunity to be really loose with my brushwork, not having to worry about detail. I can see by Edgar Payne's work that detail wasn't his main priority in his paintings. He's all about getting the colours, the values and the composition and overall atmosphere of the scene that he was painting, and to me it makes his paintings look a lot more realistic. And in my opinion, Edgar Payne was saying more with less brush strokes. Now moving on to the sky here, and I used a mix of ultramarine blue with some titanium white, a dash of phthalo green, and then as I was painting it I thought, you know what, I think it needs a little bit of cadmium yellow in there, so there's also a tiny amount. It's a really nice rich blue sky, absolutely gorgeous. Looks really, really nice, and I'm just loving painting this artwork. Now I noticed also the brushwork in this painting, and that as it was getting more towards the horizon, so this area of the clouds that I'm painting here, that it was a little bit lighter in value, so I've added more titanium white in the mix, and then certainly as we're near the horizon line, the value of the sky is much, much lighter. So now moving on to the rock formations here, and I figured that there would be a few colours in these mixes. I noticed it's not overly saturated, but there is a few more saturated colours, certainly the reds in there. So I started off with a base of burnt sienna, some titanium white and some yellow ochre, and then I increased the saturation by mixing in some cadmium red and cadmium yellow, and I was just varying up those mixes. There's quite a few different textures in this rock face here. I've noticed certainly the more high chroma tones were near the base of the rock structures. I found that a number 3 filbert brush was perfect for this area of the painting. Could also use a flat brush as well. I was really focusing on the brush marks and just getting those loose gestural marks in there. It's building up some nice textures within the rocks. And this was where I was getting in some more cadmium reds in my mix here. Following that, I painted in some of the tones in the distant landforms. So these are going to be a bit more desaturated, so I edged the mix much more on the burnt sienna side. Also, if I needed to, I could also use a little bit of ultramarine blue to desaturate, but there's a lot of titanium white in the mix as well. And next, to paint these distant plants, I'm not sure if they're grasses or sedges or what they are, as I said earlier. But they're certainly pretty pale and light in value, much lighter than the cloud shadows that are being cast over the landscape. So for this I used a mixture of yellow ochre with a bit of ultramarine blue, some titanium white, and then even a tiny amount of phthalo green just to shift the hue a little bit. And then as I was working my way forward, I was just increasing the saturation by mixing in some cadmium yellow. I'm using another number 5 flat brush here and mainly doing downwards vertical marks, but also some sweeping horizontal marks as well. So I'm building up those clumps of plants. Now just to balance out the green, I added some reddish marks, red being opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it's going to complement the green, but I was actually just using the rock mix that I'd painted a moment ago. So there's some cadmium red in there, also some burnt sienna and some alizarin crimson, and then I painted this pale area as well, which I'm guessing is just the exposed ground, but it's the green mixed with a lot of titanium white and some more cadmium yellow within there. I actually found as I was painting this that I blocked in all the areas quite quickly, and then the last thing I did was to start painting in some of these details on the horses. I started off with the horse shadows. This was just a mix of burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine blue. These two colours combined make a near black, especially because burnt sienna is actually a dark orange and orange is opposite to blue on the colour wheel. And then for the areas of the horses that are in light, there's a lot more burnt sienna in the mix and a dash of titanium white. I'm also using much smaller brushes here, mostly number 0 synthetic rounds for some more accurate marks. Now, once I'd marked in all the main zones of the painting, I went across the whole thing and just tidied up areas and restated the dark values. So starting back with the cloud shadows, I was just adding more shape to the clouds and trying to follow as best I can with the original painting. Obviously there is a bit of a difference, and as I say, the dimensions of my painting does differ somewhat to the original, so the clouds and sky is a little bit squished and compressed compared with the original, but I don't think it's that noticeable. Another thing I did was to restate some of these shadows within the rocks, because I found that once I'd painted the areas in light that those shadows were a little bit light and the value needed to be darkened somewhat. Again, it's the same mixture I was using earlier on: ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, only a small amount, and alizarin crimson, with alizarin crimson being a little bit more dominant within the mix. Actually, these colour combinations are just brilliant for landscapes in general. I've found ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, alizarin crimson, perfect for cloud shadows, rock shadows, distant landform shadows, mountain shadows, rocks and stones in general. It's just a really versatile go-to colour combination, especially if you're painting a landscape and you're not quite sure what the shadow colours are. That colour combination generally always works regardless. Now, what I was doing to those rocks is I was adding a few lighter values in there, mostly titanium white with a little yellow ochre and a dash of cadmium yellow. I also sharpened up the shadows in these plants in the foreground. Again, it was using a mix of ultramarine blue with a little yellow ochre. And I was finishing up the painting by just adding a few last details here and tidying up some areas. And then there's those last details as well to be added to the horses and horse riders. Now, I really enjoyed painting this artwork, and it's given me a bit of an insight into how Edgar Payne might have possibly painted or approached his works. And I've learned some things from this, and some things that I might be able to actually apply to my own artworks, especially when I next go out plein air painting. So this has actually really been a good learning experience for me as well, and awesome to be able to demonstrate it to you. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it inspires you to check out the artist Edgar Payne and paint some landscapes. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, share this video, and also leave me a comment in the comment section below. I check all the comments, I read them, and I do my best to answer as many of them as I can. Now, if you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes, then check out the painting tutorial videos I have on my website. I've got some video tutorial bundles there on painting landscapes and seascapes, and I'm going to be making more of these in the future as well. So I've put the link below. Also, if you subscribe to my Patreon channel, I'm making a full-length painting tutorial video every month. There's also reference photos, lesson notes, and other content throughout the month, and there's also access to a private Telegram chat where you can chat with other artists and share your artwork. So it's all for just $5 a month, and I've put the link in the description box below. Now lastly, if you'd like to get a free ebook from me called Introduction to Oil Painting, you can get this by subscribing to my email list, and again I've put the link in the description box below. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a beautiful day, and I shall see you next time.